It's a little after 6 in the morning, and the temperature downtown hasn't decided to climb yet. The streetlights are still on. Steam rises off a manhole cover near the curb, and the only sound is the scrape of a plastic ice scraper working its way across a windshield. The man holding that scraper is in his early 60s. He's wearing a faded Carhartt jacket with a torn cuff, work boots that have been resoled at least once, and a knit cap pulled down over his ears. His truck is a 2009 pickup, gray, with a small dent in the tailgate he never bothered to fix. He finishes the windshield, blows into his hands, and looks out across the lot in front of him. It's a parking lot. Gravel, mostly, with a strip of cracked asphalt near the entrance. Maybe 28 spaces. There's a small wooden booth by the gate where an attendant sits with a space heater and a thermos, and a hand-painted sign leaning against the chain-link fence that reads, in fading letters, $5, all day. The man walks the edge of the lot, the way some people walk a garden. He notices a pothole that's filled with ice. He crouches, taps it with his knuckle, and makes a small note in a yellow legal pad he keeps folded in his jacket pocket. He waves at the attendant in the booth, and the attendant waves back, and the two of them exchange a few words about the cold the way people do when they've known each other a long time. If you drove past him right now, you would not look twice. You would assume he's the guy who plows the lot, or fixes the gate, or empties the meter. You would assume he works here. He doesn't work here. He owns it. He owns the gravel, the booth, the cracked asphalt, the fence, and the ground all of it sits on. And he owns the lot across the street, the one behind the old Bankhas, La Padank building, the one next to the coffee shop with the green awning, and 2 more you'd walk right past without ever wondering who held the deed. 6 of them, scattered across about 6 blocks of a downtown that is slowly, quietly, becoming worth a great deal of money. Nobody downtown knows this. The people who park here every morning don't know it. The attorneys who buy monthly permits don't know it. The developers who've started circling these blocks like they invented the idea don't know it either. They see an old man in a torn jacket checking on a potholed lot, and they file him away as part of the scenery. That's exactly how he likes it. His name is Ray. For 38 years, he drove a beverage distribution route through this same downtown. Every morning before sunrise, he'd back his truck into these same alleys, unload cases into the same restaurants and corner stores, and pull away before most of the city had finished its first cup of coffee. He knew which streets flooded when it rained. He knew which corners were always busy, and which ones never were. He knew this place the way you only know something after you've driven through it 10,000 mornings in a row. And then one day, the route ended. They threw him a small party in a break room, gave him a card everyone signed, and that was that. 38 years, and he was done, retired, finished. The word people use when they mean, you're not part of the story anymore. That was 12 years ago. In the time since, while everyone assumed he was somewhere fishing or watching television or fading quietly into the background the way retired men are supposed to, Ray built something, not loudly, not online, not with a single person clapping for him. He built it one boring, overlooked, gravel-covered parcel at a time, using the one thing nobody else in this city seemed to be looking at. He finishes his walk around the lot, climbs back into the cold cab of his truck, and sits for a moment with his hands on the wheel, looking out at the skyline, starting to catch the first light. Everyone downtown knew Ray's face. Almost nobody knew what Ray owned, and the thing he owned was the one thing they all walked across every single day, without ever once looking down. It started with a single lot, and a number Ray scratched onto a napkin at a diner counter. 6 months into a retirement he didn't know what to do with. The diner was the kind of place that hadn't changed its menu in 20 years, and Ray liked it for exactly that reason. He'd sit at the counter with a coffee and the local paper, and on this particular morning, somewhere between the weather and the obituaries, he found himself bored in a way that frightened him a little. 6 months into retirement, he had run out of things to fix around the house. He'd cleaned the garage twice. He'd driven his wife a little crazy, and he had started doing something he hadn't done in years, which was drive downtown for no reason at all, just to look at the streets he used to work. That's how he noticed the lot. It sat beside the county courthouse, behind a sagging chain, and a sign that said for sale in letters that had been bleaching in the sun for 2 summers. Gravel, weeds coming up through it, a handful of cars parked there anyway, because people needed somewhere to leave their trucks when they had jury duty or a hearing or a permit to pull at the county office across the street. Ray had driven past it 1,000 times in his working life and never once thought about it. Now he thought about it. He called the number on the sign that afternoon, half expecting to feel foolish. The agent told him it was an estate sale. An old man had owned the lot for decades, charged people a few bucks to park, and when he died, his kids out of state just wanted it gone. They'd been trying to sell it for 2 years. Nobody wanted a patch of gravel next to a courthouse. There was no building on it, nothing to renovate, nothing that looked like an opportunity to the kind of people who go looking for opportunities. They wanted $95,000, and they'd taken less if someone serious showed up. Ray went back to the diner, ordered another coffee, and did the math on a napkin. He counted the spaces, 28 if you painted the lines right. The courthouse across the street meant a steady stream of people who needed to park all day and would pay monthly for the privilege of not circling the block. Say he charged $70 a month for a reserved spot? If he kept it mostly full with monthly permits, plus the daily folks paying $5 a pop, the lot might bring in somewhere between $2,200 and $2,600 a month. Then he started subtracting, because Ray had never in his life trusted a number that only went up. Property taxes, insurance, a part-time attendant to sit in the booth and keep people honest, gravel and striping and the snow he'd have to plow himself in January. By the time he was done crossing things out, the napkin said the lot might clear $1,300, maybe $1,500 a month, if nothing went wrong. $1,500 a month. It wasn't much. It wasn't a fortune. It wasn't freedom. It wasn't anything you'd brag about. But Ray sat there and looked at that number, and what struck him was not the size of it. It was the source of it. He had spent 38 years trading his mornings for a paycheck. If he didn't drive the route didn't pay. This was different. This $1,500 came in whether he drove anywhere or not. It came from the gravel. He bought the lot for $88,000, talked down from $95,000, with a chunk of his savings and a small loan from a community bank where the loan officer looked at him a little sideways. A retired delivery driver buying commercial dirt. It didn't fit the picture the man had in his head, and he asked Ray more than once if he was sure. Ray was sure. The first few months were unglamorous in every way you'd expect. He painted the lines himself. He hired a retired neighbor to sit in the booth. He learned that a parking lot is mostly a business of small problems. A broken gate arm, a customer who swore he'd paid, a night when someone left a dead car on the lot for a week. None of it was exciting. None of it would have made a good story at a party. But at the end of the first full month, Ray drove to the bank, and he deposited a check made of money he had not traded a single morning for. He stood at the counter, and he felt something he hadn't felt at the retirement party. He felt like he was still in the story. What he didn't understand yet, standing there with that deposit slip, was that the parking was never the point. The $1,500 a month was real, but it was almost a distraction. The lot had taught him something the napkin couldn't show him, something about what he had actually bought when he bought that gravel. The money was not the lesson. The structure was, and it would be another year before Ray fully understood what he was really standing on. The thing that changed Ray's mind happened on an ordinary evening, the way these things usually do. He'd stopped by the lot after dinner to check on a gate arm that kept sticking. The attendant had gone home. The courthouse crowd had cleared out, and the gravel was nearly empty. Just a couple of cars and the long shadows the streetlights threw across the stones. Ray was crouched by the gate with a wrench when he noticed the activity 2 doors down. A small crew was out in front of the old furniture building, the one that had been empty for years. They had a tripod and a laser and a clipboard, and they were measuring, surveying. Ray watched them for a while, the way you watch anything when you've got a wrench in your hand and no real hurry to use it. And somewhere in that watching, something turned over in his head. Those men weren't measuring the building. The building was junk. Everyone knew that. They were measuring the land the building sat on. They were figuring out what could go there instead. And that was when Ray looked back at his own gravel lot, and for the first time, he didn't see a parking lot at all. He saw the ground. Up until that night, Ray had thought of himself as a man who owned a small parking business, 28 spaces, $1,500 a month, a booth and a gate. But standing there in the dark, he understood that the parking was just something he was doing with the land while he waited. The cars weren't the asset. The asset was the dirt underneath them, and the dirt was worth whatever somebody could eventually build on it. The parking income was just the rent the land paid him for being patient. It sounds like a small distinction. It isn't. It's the difference between two completely different ways of looking at the same patch of gravel. And almost everybody in that city was looking at the wrong one. They saw a place to leave the car. Ray now saw a piece of downtown that he could own for next to nothing, that would pay for itself month after month, while the city slowly decided it wanted to be something more. He started driving downtown differently after that. For 38 years, he'd read these streets as a route, a sequence of stops and alleys and loading docks. Now he read them as a map of ownership. Who owns that corner? Who owns the empty lot behind the bank? Who's paying taxes on the gravel by the train station? And how old are they? And do their kids live in another state? He started going to the county building, the one he used to deliver to, and pulling records. Public records. Anyone could see them. He'd sit at a folding table with a yellow legal pad and write down parcel numbers, owners, the year each one last changed hands. He taught himself to read a plat map. He was not a sophisticated man, and he'd be the first to tell you so, but he was patient, and he had time. And time turned out to be the only real skill the job required. What he found, sitting at that table, was the pattern that would shape the next decade of his life. Almost every cheap, overlooked lot downtown was owned by someone like the man whose estate had sold him the first one. Older owners. People who'd bought the land for a song 40 years ago, charged a few dollars to park, and never thought of it as anything more than a little side income. Their lots were underpriced, undermanaged, half the time still charging the same rates they'd charged in the 90s. Broken signs, no monthly permits, cash in a coffee can. Most people would have seen those lots and seen nothing. Ray saw a list. He saw that the very thing that made these parcels invisible, the fact that they were boring, gravel, ugly, ignored, was exactly what kept them cheap. Nobody was bidding against him because nobody else was looking at the ground. They were all looking at the cars. He drove home that night and sat at the kitchen table and told his wife that he thought he could do this more than once, that the first lot wasn't a fluke or a hobby, that it was a kind of template, and the city was full of the raw material, and most of it was owned by people who'd be relieved to sell. She asked him how many lots he was talking about. Ray didn't have a number yet, but he had something better than a number. He had a way of seeing the entire downtown that nobody around him seemed to share, and he had the patience to act on it slowly, one quiet parcel at a time. The hard part wasn't going to be finding the lots. The hard part was going to be everything that came after the buying. The second lot took Ray almost a year to buy, and that pace turned out to be the whole secret, though it never felt like a secret at the time. It just felt slow. He'd found it the way he found most of them, sitting at the county building with his legal pad, a gravel lot near the train station, owned by a widow whose husband had run it for 30 years before he passed. She didn't want to deal with it anymore. The signage was gone, the rates hadn't moved in a decade, and a man she'd hired to collect the cash was, Ray suspected, keeping a good portion of it for himself. She was almost grateful when Ray made an offer. He didn't have the cash sitting around. He'd put most of his savings into the first lot. So he did the thing that makes this kind of story believable instead of magical, which is that he used the first lot to help buy the second. The income from the courthouse lot, plus a modest loan against it, plus a careful negotiation, and the train station lot was his, not bought with a windfall, bought with patience, leverage he could afford, and the cash flow from the thing he already owned. Then he fixed it. And fixing it was where the real work lived. The first thing he learned, over and over, was that the man in the booth was always the problem. On the train station lot, he caught his second attendant skimming within 3 months, the same coffee can arithmetic that had quietly drained the widow's husband for years. Cash businesses leak, and Ray got tired of plugging the leaks one dishonest employee at a time. So he spent money he didn't really want to spend and put in a license plate camera system and a pay station. Less charm, fewer handshakes, but the money that came in was finally the money he could count. The lots themselves fought him too. One winter, a single storm dumped enough snow that the plowing and salting ate an entire month's profit across all of his lots at once. He sat at the kitchen table that February doing the math and feeling, for the first time, a little foolish. Another time he came close to buying a lot that looked perfect on paper, only to have an old instinct tell him to dig a little. It turned out the seller hadn't mentioned a long-term lease buried in the paperwork that would have tied Ray's hands for years. He walked away. The deals he didn't do, he'd say later, mattered as much as the ones he did. The worst of it was the lot that used to be a gas station. He bought it cheap, too cheap, and found out why when the environmental testing came back. There was contamination in the soil from the old underground tanks, the kind of thing that turns a bargain into a money pit. He spent a small fortune and several sleepless months sorting it out, and he came within a hair of losing real money on the whole thing. After that, he never bought another parcel without testing the ground first. The lesson cost him, but he only had to learn it once. And underneath all of it ran a quieter kind of difficulty, the kind that doesn't show up on a napkin. His wife worried every time he signed another loan. She'd grown up without much, and watching her retired husband take on debt to buy gravel did not let her sleep well, and Ray knew it, and they had more than one tense dinner about it. His grown kids didn't understand him at all. They'd ask, gently at first and then less gently, why he couldn't just relax. Why a man who'd earned his rest was out plowing snow at 65 and arguing with the county over a parcel line. He didn't have a good answer that fit into a dinner conversation. He just knew he wasn't done. Mostly, it was lonely. Nobody clapped for any of this. There was no community of people doing what he was doing. No applause, no posts, no one to call when a deal closed except his wife, who mostly wished he'd stop. He was right about something that nobody around him could see, and being right in private for years, with no one to confirm it, is one of the hardest things a person can do. There were nights he wondered if he was the fool and everyone else was sane. But the lots kept paying, and every time one of them threw off enough cash, Ray put it toward the next, not toward a nicer truck, not toward a vacation, not toward anything anyone could see, toward more ground. The first lot cost him $88,000. By the time he was buying his fifth and sixth, downtown had started to wake up, and the prices had climbed into the hundreds of thousands, $250, $350, $450 for the better parcels. He paid it carefully, because he could see what was coming even when the sellers couldn't. By his late 60s, Ray quietly controlled 6 lots across 6 blocks of a downtown that was beginning to be worth real money. 6 deeds in a folder in a kitchen drawer. And still, almost nobody had the faintest idea. To the whole city, he was just the old man who checked on the gravel. The people who would soon be desperate to buy what he owned hadn't even noticed he existed yet. One of them was about to throw a party, and Ray was going to be standing in the room. The party was a downtown networking mixer held in the lobby of a building that had just been renovated into something with exposed brick and expensive lighting. Ray was there because the organizer had invited every property owner on the block, not knowing or caring that the quiet man on the list owned half the parking the guests had used to get there. The center of that room was a man named Derek. Derek was maybe 40, sharp jaw, good haircut, the kind of presence that fills a space the moment it walks in. He drove a Range Rover, a new one, and he'd parked it where people could see it. He wore a watch that cost more than Ray's first lot had cost to repave. He worked the room like it was his job, because, in a way it was, shaking hands, dropping the names of deals he was working on, talking in big round numbers about the projects he was about to close. By every visible measure, Derek was the most successful person in that building. He made more in a good month than Ray's lots made in a year. He looked the part so completely that nobody thought to question it. That was rather the point of looking the part. Ray stood near the wall with a plastic cup of coffee, in a clean shirt and the same kind of unremarkable clothes he always wore, and watched. Nobody talked to him for long. Why would they? He didn't look like anyone worth knowing. What the room couldn't see was the arithmetic underneath each of them. Derek's life was a performance, and performances are expensive. The Range Rover was leased. The watch was financed. The lifestyle that signaled how rich he was, the dinners, the clothes, the office with his name on it, was also the thing draining him because the income that paid for all of it had to keep arriving every single month or the whole picture collapsed. And the income depended on the next deal, and the next deal depended on looking like a man who closed deals, which meant he could never stop spending on the appearance of success. He was running as fast as he could just to stay where everyone already believed he was. Visibility, it turned out, has a price. and Derek paid it every month whether he wanted to or not. Ray paid almost nothing for how he looked. The old truck was paid off. The house was paid off. His clothes came from the same store they'd come from for 30 years. He had nothing to prove to anyone in that room. And because he had nothing to prove, he had no monthly bill for proving it. The money his lots threw off didn't have to go toward maintaining an image. It could just go back into the ground, quietly, where it compounded out of sight. That was the whole trick. And it was almost too simple for anyone to take seriously. Looking rich was a cost. Being rich was usually quiet, and most of the time it was parked somewhere nobody glanced at twice. At one point that evening, Derek stepped outside to take a call, and he handed his keys to the attendant in the small lot beside the building so the Range Rover could be moved up front where it belonged. Ray watched through the window. It was his lot. Derek had no idea. He was standing on ground that the unremarkable old man by the wall happened to own, handing his keys to a man Ray paid, and it would never once have occurred to him to wonder about any of it. Being underestimated, Ray had learned, was not an insult. It was an advantage. When people don't think you have anything, they don't compete with you for it. They don't raise their offers when they hear you're bidding. They don't watch what you buy. He had assembled 6 lots across a reviving downtown precisely because nobody believed the man in the torn jacket was assembling anything. His invisibility was part of the strategy. It always had been. But it would be dishonest to pretend that quiet wealth came free, that the only cost was Derek's and Ray paid nothing. That isn't true, and Ray knew it better than anyone. The cost of being the only one who could see what you'd built was that you carried it alone. There was no room full of people congratulating him. His wife had made her peace with the lots but never loved them. His kids still didn't really understand. He couldn't talk about any of it without it sounding like a boast or a confession, so mostly, he didn't talk about it at all. He had real freedom, more than anyone in that lobby, and almost no one in his life to share the meaning of it with. He set down his coffee cup, said goodnight to no one in particular, and walked out past the Range Rover to his truck. 5 years after that party, Derek would be selling. Ray would still be buying, and the moment that finally made the whole quiet thing visible, even to Ray, would arrive in the most ordinary place imaginable, in a dented mailbox outside a modest house. The letter came on an ordinary Tuesday, in the dented mailbox outside Ray's modest house, tucked between a utility bill and a grocery flyer. He almost didn't open it that day. He'd been out at the courthouse lot in the cold that morning. The same lot, the same booth, the same cracked asphalt by the gate, scraping ice off the same gray truck he'd been driving for 17 years. By now, he was in his early 70s. The attendant still waved. The skyline behind the gravel still caught the morning light. To anyone driving past, nothing had changed at all. He still looked like the man who checked on the parking. He opened the letter at the kitchen table, with a cup of coffee cooling beside him. It was from a development company, a serious one, with serious money behind it. They wanted to build an apartment tower on his block, and to do it, they needed 3 of his lots, the 3 that sat side by side near the old furniture building where, years earlier, Ray had watched a crew with a laser and a clipboard and finally understood what he was standing on. They were offering a number for those 3 parcels that, a decade ago, would have made him laugh out loud. Because here is what 12 years of quiet, unglamorous patience had actually built. 6 small surface lots, bought one at a time, the first for $88,000, the last few for several $100,000 each, as the city woke up to its own downtown. Together, those parcels were now worth somewhere around $4.2 million, even after the careful debt Ray had taken on to assemble them. And while their value had been quietly climbing, they'd never stopped paying. Across all 6, after the taxes and the insurance and the snow and the pay stations, the lots threw off somewhere between $9,000 and $12,000 a month after month. Whether Ray drove anywhere or not, none of it had come from parking. Not really. The parking had just been the rent the land paid him while he waited for everyone else to see what he'd seen first. The cars were never the asset. The ground was the asset. And the ground had done exactly what he'd bet, patiently, in private, with no one cheering, that it would do. Ray read the letter twice. Then he set it down, and he poured himself another cup of coffee, and he did not call the developer back that day. He was in no hurry. He never had been. That was the entire point. Think about where he started. A man handed a signed card in a break room and told, in so many words, that his part of the story was over. 38 years of driving a route, and then the word everyone uses when they mean you're finished. Retired. Done. Ray didn't get rich because he was smarter than the people at that mixer, or younger, or louder, or because he had some secret nobody else could have learned. He got rich because he treated retirement as the moment he was finally free to do the slow thing he'd never had time for. Because he was willing to look down at the ground everyone else walked across without a thought. And because he was willing to wait far longer than anyone around him believed was reasonable. That's the part that's hard to sell, and the part that's true. There was no overnight. There was a snowstorm that ate a month's profit, an attendant with his hand in the till, a contaminated lot that nearly sank him, a wife who worried, kids who didn't understand, and years of being right in private, with no one to confirm it. The wealth was real, but it was earned in a currency most people aren't willing to spend, which is patience and the willingness to be underestimated. And so, the richest man on that downtown block, the one the developers were now writing letters to, was the one in the old pickup, scraping ice off his windshield that nobody had ever once looked at twice. Wealth is not always loud. Most of the time, the best assets look boring, and the people who own them look ordinary. And that is exactly why they're available to anyone patient enough to notice. Ownership changes how you see your own city. Once you start looking at the ground instead of the cars, you can't go back to seeing it the old way. And the richest person in the room is very often the one nobody is paying any attention to at all. So here's the real question. The one Ray would want you to sit with. What's the boring thing in your own town? The one you drive past every single day that you've never actually looked at? The empty lot, the laundromat, the little storage place by the highway, the thing everyone uses and no one wonders who owns. If this story made you see one ordinary business differently, tell me in the comments which one it is. I read every single one.